Hey folks, let's talk about a book that shook the 18th century like a sneeze during a silent exam. Tristram Shandy by Laurence Sterne. This novel's like the rock star of literary history, famous for messing with storytelling in ways that had everyone raising their eyebrows. Today we're pulling out our magnifying glasses, not literally, so calm down, to see how Sterne's magnus opus plays with the medical ideas of its time. Picture this, a book where childbirth, sneezes, and quirky doctors are in the spotlight. You see, back in the 18th century, medicine was much different than today. People believed health was all about balancing bodily fluids, and giving birth was as risky as juggling knives. Doctors were starting to get their act together, but there was still plenty of side-eyeing at quackery. Plus, everyone was buzzing about how our bodies and minds are connected and getting all excited about the nervous system. So Sterne decided to throw all of this into Tristram Shandy. Let's start with the humoral theory. Imagine thinking your entire personality is down to whether you've got too much phlegm or bile sloshing around inside you. Laurence Sterne grabs this idea and runs with it in Tristram Shandy, serving up characters like Uncle Toby and Walter Shandy on a platter of absurdity. And before I forget, this is a great time to hit that subscribe button to keep up with weekly literature conversations like this. But back to the task at hand. Uncle Toby, bless him, is the epitome of the phlegmatic personality. Calm, unflappable, and as collected as a monk in meditation. But Sterne isn't just saying, look at this chill guy. No, he's throwing us into a comedic loop where Toby's laid-back nature gets tangled in the most unexpected ways, especially in his obsession with military fortifications. It's like finding out your Zen yoga instructor is secretly into heavy metal. Unexpected, yet hilariously fitting. Then there's Walter Shandy, a walking, talking contradiction to any attempt to pigeonhole him using the humoral theory. He's supposed to be sanguine, right? Optimistic, passionate, and a bit of a hothead. Sterne uses Walter's character to show us how messy and unpredictable humans can be. And Walter's theories and philosophies about life and his meticulous planning for Tristram's upbringing are all over the map, proving that categorizing human behavior is like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Sterne shows us this through the dialogues and bizarre situations these characters encounter. And like when Walter Shandy devises a name for his son, believing names have a profound impact on destiny. It's a direct poke at the idea that we can control or predict personality traits, as if saying, you think fluids decide your fate? Hold my beer while I show you how a name can supposedly do that. Then there's the depiction of childbirth. Childbirth in Tristram Shandy is like a slapstick comedy set in a haunted house. You're not sure whether to laugh or scream, so you do a bit of both. Sterne grabs the messy, terrifying ordeal of 18th century childbirth and he turns it into something you can't help but gawk at, partly in horror, partly in disbelief, and mostly in laughter. But it really wasn't a laughing matter in that time. In fact, it was part of a politicized debate as the figure of the man-midwife intruded upon female spaces. Enter the obstetrical forceps, the 18th century equivalent of introducing a chainsaw into a delicate operation. It's supposed to help with difficult births, but in Sterne's hands, it becomes a symbol of the era's crude approach to something as natural as childbirth. Before the advent of the forceps, childbirth was left in the hands of female midwives and generally thought of as a quite natural affair. Then, with forceps, men could invade this space, and not everyone was happy about it either. Tories were in favor of them, while Whigs preferred less invasive approaches. And it's pretty clear where Sterne sides in this debate through his depiction of Tristram's birth. When Dr. Slop, the novel's bumbling man of medicine, prepares to use the forceps on Tristram's mother, the scene shifts from medical drama to pure farce. Imagine a doctor, forceps in hand, looking more like a medieval torturer than a caregiver, all while pontificating on the virtues of modern medicine. Sterne writes, with all the forceps and instruments of destruction about him, and that paints a picture of a battlefield rather than a birth room. And this isn't just for laughs, though. Sterne uses these moments to critique the medical practices of his time. He's essentially saying, look how far we've come, only to end up here. So it's a jab at the overconfidence of the medical field, which, in its rush to innovate, often forgot the humanity of its patients. The comedy amplifies the horror of the situation, making the reader chuckle and cringe at the absurdity and real dangers of childbirth back then. and Tristram emerges from the womb with a broken nose, squished by Dr. Slop's forceps, which you might even argue is an emasculating act in a world that thought the size of a man's nose says something about the size of other body parts. That aside, another area of interest in the novel is the body-mind connection. If you think it sounds like something off a modern wellness retreat flyer, you're not wrong. But Laurence Sterne was onto this way before it was cool, weaving it through Tristram Shandy with a mix of insight and irreverence that makes you pause between chuckling. Sterne parades the connection between our bodies and our minds in front of us, using his characters as living, breathing, and frequently suffering examples of this deep interplay. Take, for instance, the way he deals with Tristram's unfortunate nasal incident. The physical mishap of having his nose crushed at birth essentially springboards into discussions about how physical attributes and accidents can shape our psyche and identity. He's a small-nosed man in a big-nosed world, and that has to mess with his head. It's as if Sterne is nudging us, saying, see how the physical can mess with the mental? But Sterne goes beyond just physical accidents affecting the mind. He explores the psychological warfare of embarrassment, stress, and pressures of expectations. Consider the scene where Walter Shandy, Tristram's father, frets over the naming of his son, or the endless debates on how to ensure Tristram's intellectual upbringing. These go beyond comedic skits to explorations of how our mental state is a tangled web with our physical experiences and social inputs. Sterne's tale is a playground where the physical and the mental dance together, often stepping on each other's toes. It's like watching a ballet where the dancers are sometimes in perfect harmony and sometimes hilariously out of sync. This dance reflects the era's growing fascination with how our minds and bodies interact, a topic that philosophers and medical professionals of the time are beginning to seriously consider. Through Tristram Shandy, Sterne suggests that our mental and physical selves are not just connected, but are inseparably woven together, influencing and shaping each other in ways that we're only beginning to understand. It's a perspective that invites reflection on how our minds and bodies navigate the world together. Sterne also dives headfirst into the 18th century's fascination with the nervous system, long before the term neuroscience was a twinkle in science's eye. He doesn't just use this background as decor. It's front and center, influencing how the characters interact with the world and each other. And this exploration is like opening a window into the era's curiosity about how our inner workings impact everything we do. And one of the most vivid illustrations of this interest is in the portrayal of Uncle Toby. His war injury is something more than a physical wound. It's a gateway for Sterne to discuss the impact of physical trauma on mental health and emotional well-being. Uncle Toby's hobby of reconstructing battles in his garden is a quirky pastime, but it also reflects how deeply our nerves are tied to our experiences and coping mechanisms. It's as if Sterne tells us, look, our bodies remember and our nerves are the storytellers. And then there's the character of Corporal Trim, whose loyalty and emotional responses provide a contrast to Toby's more stoic demeanor, further emphasizing the novel's exploration of the nervous system's role in shaping our emotional landscapes. Through Trim, Sterne seems to argue that our emotional responses are not just whims of the moment, but are deeply connected to how our nervous system processes the world around us. And Sterne's treatment of sensibility, a term that in the 18th century that referred to heightened emotional responsiveness to the world, is particularly telling. Characters like Toby and Trim don't just feel. They feel through a lens crafted by their physical and nervous conditions. And this sensitivity is a double-edged sword, making them both more human and more vulnerable to the slings and arrows of the outrageous fortunes. And through these characters and their experiences, Sterne taps into the 18th century's intrigue with the nervous system. It's part about medical curiosity, but more about understanding the human condition. The novel becomes a kind of early, unwitting exploration into how our nervous systems dictate the ride of our emotions, reactions, and interactions with the world. So, Tristram Shandy is a literary joyride and a deep dive into the medical mindsets of the 18th century, showing us how literature can reflect, critique, and even poke fun at the scientific beliefs of its day. And if you enjoyed this video, this one might also be interesting.